Hey everybody, I want to give you a really concrete example about how our investments really shape the world around us and how deeply powerful and important it is to take ethical responsibility for our money. My name is Michael Wheelwright. I'm the managing director of a registered investment advisor called Holistic Finance, where money meets meaning. So I've done some really fun research on eggs. And I want to talk to you about eggs. I know it sounds crazy, but let's talk about it. I spent a lot of time as a community organizer and activist in Utah before moving to Hawaii and becoming managing director of Holistic Finance. And I had the sense at the time, working on things like community gardens, air quality, showing up at the Capitol, for various endeavors and initiatives. I was trying to make as big a difference as I could. Now that I'm deep in finance and I can see where the world is being generated from our investments so profoundly. In fact, if you do a little research with me, and I'll walk you through it today, the impacts of our investing are so much more profound than our individual choices as families purchasing products and services or organizing communities. Those things are important too, but our investments are really the biggest elephant in the room that come to creating the world that we're in together. So I'm going to talk to you about the difference between pastured eggs and factory farmed eggs, and that's one of the fun companies that are fun to analyze within one of the smaller companies that we use in our values aligned portfolio. But I want to talk a little more about this vote with your dollar thing. So many of you trying to make a difference in the world might have heard, of these different vote with your dollar initiatives. And they're almost all talking about spending money on products or services from brands that align with you, small shifts in spending, right? But none of these are talking about investing, when investing your dollars wisely and voting with your investment dollars is actually way more important for creating the change that we want to see in the world. And here's an example. How much more impact on the world will my $1 million in retirement investments have compared to my personal consumption habits? Vastly more impact. There's a lot of ways that you could judge the impact, but I think if you start to poke around a little bit, you'll recognize, like I do, I've seen some estimates of having, 5 to 20 times the impact of our personal choices. So I want to show you an example of that within the egg making world. If you have a traditional BlackRock, Vanguard, ETF, or mutual fund style portfolio, you very likely have investments in a company called Cal-Maine. They're the largest factory farm producer of eggs in this country. There are better ways to make eggs. We're going to be comparing them to a company called Vital Farms today. Vital Farms, you might recognize their labeling. They're in most of the big grocery stores, and they're very passionate about being pasture-raised, bringing ethical food to the table, traceable, seeing where the actual eggs are laid. They're B Corp certified. This is a company that cares deeply about the welfare of their chickens and producing healthy, high-quality eggs. Whereas Cal-Maine, which is what you'd have if you're not using a values-aligned portfolio, it's obviously horrible conditions for those chickens and producing a ton of eggs. So I had some resources, some AI resources kind of come up with this graphic about the egg consumption versus investment in egg systems. So if you had $10,000 invested with Vital Farms, you'd be producing about 4,600 eggs a year out to the general public getting consumed based on your ownership share of having investments in that company. Whereas if that 10,000 stayed in a traditional investment portfolio that was in Cal-Maine as the factory farm producer, they do produce more eggs per dollar. There'd be 25,000 factory farm eggs going out into the country to the families based on your ownership responsibility as a shareholder within the company. The most you could be doing with a family of 4 is maybe 1,100 eggs a year. So I'm just trying to point out that you might be passionate about animal welfare and about healthy food, and you might be choosing to always do that for your family. But if you let your investments go unexplored and they're still stuck in Cal-Maine, you're creating 25 times the impact of still eggs in the world that you would normally try to avoid or wish could change in the system. So that's kind of a fun way to look at how important and profound our investments really are in how they shape the world that we're around. When I look at companies to include or exclude from a values-aligned portfolio, we're doing two things, right? We're looking at the impact of the company, and we can clearly see Vital Farms has a positive impact for animal welfare and healthy foods. And we also look and see, is there anything in groups like Morningstar? There's another great group called Holistico that we use, and we're looking at, do they have the proper fundamentals? Is there anything in their financial reports and outcomes that would indicate that they're a company to be able to compete and continue to produce profits? Vital Farms had a really big big year last year, and they're going through a lot of expansion right now, but they didn't give me any reason to exclude them from the portfolio. So we're looking at two things whenever we're talking about values-aligned portfolios. How does it actually impact the world around them? Do they seem to care? The way they source and produce their products and services, are they ethical and transparent? And then from there, looking at the financial fundamentals and making sure they're managing things well. So anyway, I thought you'd find that interesting. Coming from a community organizer perspective, now being deep into the advisory world, I feel like I'm doing actually way more positive impact by helping people with values-aligned work. And I hope that this is interesting to you and learning a little more about our process and one of the companies that I think is really trying to do a good job for a livable future. Thank you so much.